Dehajith Da, and welcome to this cooking workshop, which is part of the YnChruinnaght Celtic Gathering Festival. So, I'm going to be teaching you how to make Cornish pasties, and this is the way that my grandmother taught me, so that's the way I'm going to teach you. There's lots and lots of different ways of doing it, and I'll try and point out some of the differences as we go. So we're going to start with pastry. You don't have to make your own pastry. You can buy shop-bought pastry, so you could buy either puff pastry or short crust, whichever you prefer. If I was buying it, I would probably buy puff pastry, but I'm going to show you how to make authentic pasty pastry, which is kind of a cross between the both of those. So you start off with your flour, and you're going to want strong bread flour if you can get it, but obviously at the moment any flour is good. So a plain flour or bread flour if you can, and then some fat, which we're using half margarine and half lard. There are loads of alternatives. This is the way I was taught. Some people use all butter, and some people obviously wouldn't want to use lard because it's animal fat, so you could use a vegetable fat like Trex or cooking or something like that. So it's up to you to decide what you want to do and what you like the taste of and the idea of. So we've got 500 grams of bread flour, and then we're going to use half the amount of fat. So we've got 250 grams of fat, half of each being 125 of lard and 125 of margarine. Now you want to cut these up into little chunks, if I show you. Little chunks. Just that kind of size, so they're easy to rub into the flour. So I've left a couple to show you how to do it. So just using a knife, you just cut it up like that. The margarine's quite a lot softer than the lard, so it doesn't matter so much about that. And once you've done this bit, you're going to be rubbing it into the flour and trying to make it resemble breadcrumbs. So there we have it, all chopped up, and that's going to go straight into the flour. And you're also going to put quite a generous helping of salt in that. It looks like quite a lot, but it's fine. Just get that coated in flour, and then you want to rub it with your fingertips, but not overworking it, not working it too much. Kind of an action like that, trying to get some height into it as well. This bit takes ages, so we're going to stop the video and join me again once it's over. Okay, so I've rubbed that in. And it should look like that. It looks a bit like crumble topping. Can you see that? So then if you give the bowl a shake, the larger bits will come to the top. And so then if you want, you can rub those in a bit more. But the larger bits of fat don't actually matter too much. And especially the lard melting when it cooks gives the pastry that really nice flaky, crispy quality. So then we need to add some liquid to this to bring it all together. Now it's not an exact science how much water I use for this, but I've developed my own way, a bit like if you're making bread. Some people make a well in the middle. Nobody else has ever done this that I know, but it's just a way that works for me. So make a well in the middle and then fill it with water, and then use a knife to bring it all together, so you're not using your hands too much because you don't want to warm up the ingredients too much. So if we fill that with water, and then we'll probably need a little bit more in my experience. So just bringing that together. It looks quite wet actually, so we might be alright. This is looking okay, I think. It's slightly on the wet side. So then you want to kind of move the dough around the bowl, picking up all the dry bits. And ideally, you'll make your pastry the day before you make pasties and let it rest in the fridge overnight. I'm going to do this with this lot, especially if it's a little bit wetter. It kind of gives it a chance to dry out almost. That's looking quite good actually. So as you can see, clean bowl. Next phase is just to pop that onto a floured worktop. And again, this is something I've kind of developed myself. As I said, you don't want to overwork pastry, but I find just kind of massaging and almost kneading it a tiny bit just to work that moisture through the mix helps, but that might be controversial in pasty land. There we go. You just feel it with, when it's done, which isn't a very scientific or helpful thing to say, but that feels ready. So it's a nice soft dough, which, as I say, I'm going to pop it into the fridge overnight and then carry on tomorrow. So that'll probably be enough to make 3 or 4 pasties, probably 3 big ones or 4 more normal sized ones. But to put it in the fridge, you just wrap it in cling film and then pop it in the fridge on the plate, and that's it. So we'll carry on in a mo. This is the pastry that I made yesterday and had in the fridge chilling overnight, and it's come out perfectly. It's well rested and ready to use. So the next thing we're going to do is make our pastry disc and then fill it with the veg and meat that I've already cut up. So you want to cut a wedge. So we've got a wedge a bit like that. You can form it into a ball and pop it onto a floured surface. So you're just trying to make it roughly into a circle already. Then with a floured rolling pin, roll it out. I was taught to always move the pastry rather than moving the rolling pin left and right and back and forth. So turn that over and then just do forward and back rolling, making sure that the flour on the worktop's still there. So that's looking about there. So I'm going to cut round a big dinner plate because I like them quite big. It doesn't have to be perfect. So for the filling, we'll always use beef, turnip. We call it turnip in Cornwall, and Scotland and the Isle of Man I think call it turnip as well. It's the yellow one that you might carve on hop tuna. So beef, turnip, potato and onion. So you want to chip up the vegetables into little chips like this. You want it nice and thin, not too thin, but thin enough that it's going to cook, because everything goes in raw and then is steamed, if you like, inside the pasty. And you're going to need white pepper and salt. The white pepper is more traditionally used and it's a little bit hotter, and for me just gives it a much more authentic taste. So we generally start with the turnip at the bottom. The trick is to not overfill the pasty because you're going to struggle to crimp it together later. So some turnip at the bottom. And then the trick is to season it at every level. So we've got some white pepper and some salt. Then we go for potato next. and then season again. And that potato's been cut up in the same way, just nice chipped into little small pieces rather than big cubes or anything. So then beef, and I've just already chopped this up and put some flour on it and some salt and pepper. People used to put flour on the meat to make sure that it created the gravy for the pasty, especially if, you know, in the olden days if you didn't have much meat. That's a good trick to help with that. So we use skirt or chuck steak are the two that you would traditionally use, because they're slow cooking cuts of meat. So if you can't get hold of those, you could use a casserole beef or something like that. Nice generous amount of meat, and you want it to work all the way from left to right so that when you're eating your pasty you've got some meat in every bite. And just wash my hands. And a bit more salt and pepper. And onion. This is white onion that's been chopped up quite finely. And then some people finish up with another layer of potato. I might put a little tiny bit, but it's already fairly full and you don't want to have too many problems crimping, especially if it's your first time making pasties. Better to have too little filling than too much. So a bit more seasoning for good luck. Okay, so that's what it looks like at the moment. Some people start with the rolling pin under one side and then put all their filling on the other side and then use that to lift it over, but that's not the way I was taught. I put it all in the middle and then bring it up to meet in the middle. So using some water, just going to wet one side of the semicircle here, and that just helps seal it together. Make sure your hands are dry, maybe even some flour on them. So then, offer up both sides, poking the veg and everything in there. We're just kind of sealing it together loosely. So that's like loosely a pasty shape there. And then you just want to kind of flip it onto its side a bit, like that. And then that's ready to crimp. Crimping's really hard to explain in a video, but you kind of want to get your fingers like that, a bit like a diver saying okay on both hands, with your thumb and forefinger together, and then you use the thumb and forefinger to clamp it down and then pass it to the left, then using that hand clamp and then repeat. So you kind of clamp it, pass it to the left, clamp it with the other hand so it's there fixed, and then go back and do it again. It's really hard to explain in a video where you can't really see. But basically you're sealing it all along that outer edge. And you want to keep your hands nice and dry for that. Clamp, pass it to the left, then clamp, and then go back again. And then with the water again, just under that last little bit of crimping, just tuck that down. So there we have the pasty. And you're going to put that on a baking sheet with some greaseproof paper underneath. So it should be fairly robust. So there we have it. That's our pasty. And some people would carve their initials, or the initials for who it's for, on the left hand side. And that would generally be if somebody had a pasty, perhaps they didn't like as much pepper, so then you'd know whose pasty it was when it comes out of the oven. So I'm going to make a few more and then we'll put them in the oven later. These are the two pasties I'm going to be putting in the oven. As you can see, this one's a bit darker than this one, and that's because I've actually made a vegetarian one as well. So I used, instead of the lard, I used butter and margarine instead of lard and margarine. And then inside it I had some goat's cheese, some red pepper, and I had some basil in the fridge, so I put that in as well, alongside the onion, potato and turnip. So those two are going to go into a preheated oven at 180. The last bit to do before we do that is just give them a glaze. A lot of people use egg, but I don't. I think it comes out too shiny, so I use milk instead. Now, I don't actually have a pastry brush at the moment, so I'm just going to use my fingers. So some milk in a glass, and then just rub that on the pasty, just to give it a nice kind of golden brown finish when it comes out the oven. So the other two that I've made here, as you can see, I'm going to put them in the freezer so they can go in as they are, put them in a box or wrap them in foil, and then when you come to cook them, you can cook them straight from frozen if you do it at a high temperature for 10 minutes, so something like 210, 220 for 10 minutes, and then turn it back to 180 for the rest of the time. And we're going to cook them for 45 minutes and check them. So cook them between 45 minutes and an hour. Generally I don't cook them for less than an hour, if I'm honest, but check them after 45 just in case. So for the fresh ones, into the preheated oven at 180 for 1 hour. So it's been an hour, so I'm going to get the pasties out of the oven. And there we have them. Ta-da! That's the meat one, that's the veggie one. They're looking good. What my granny would say is that now you can just, because they're really hot, you can leave them for 5 or 10 minutes with a tea towel over the top, and then they'll be ready to eat. It's a Cornish tradition to have a cup of sugary tea after a pasty, because normally in Cornwall no one has sugar in their tea, but after a pasty this is a very old tradition, so perhaps try that. If you want any more information or tips or questions that you've got for me, then please do get in contact via the website, which is www.richardtrethewey.org, and you can check out my music stuff on there as well, because I'm not just a pasty professional. So yeah, hopefully your pasties will go well, and I'd love to see some pictures if anyone makes them. So yeah, there they are again. Uncover them. And I'm going to enjoy having this in a mo. Miraz, thank you.